Welcome. I'm Sebastian Mahfood, and you're listening to WCAT Radio, the on-air wing of En Route Books and Media, bringing you the dulcet sounds of Catholic wisdom.
Good afternoon, and welcome to WCAT Radio and this edition of Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. I am your host, Dr. Anne Urlakis. I am a classically trained and degreed bioethicist. Today, I have with me a terrific guest, Dr. Cynthia Toolin. Dr. Toolin is a theologian and a memoirist who's going to speak with us about the power of forgiveness and the sanctity of human life. Before we begin, let us start as we always do with a prayer in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Dear God, our heavenly Creator, you are the author of life and of truth, the reality that you will each and every human person into being, created from the moment of conception, bearing the dignity and imprint of your own image and likeness within the very essence of our being, is a mystery beyond human understanding. Please help us to have a greater appreciation for the gift of being created in your image and likeness. Help us to reverence that reality and our brothers and sisters, especially in the tiniest and most vulnerable among them. And help us to defend the sanctity of every human life from conception to natural death. Through the intercession of Our Lady, the Blessed Virgin Mary, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
Again, thank you for tuning in to this episode of WCAT Radio's Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, discussion and interviews with a Catholic bioethicist. Today I have the joy of speaking with Dr. Cynthia Toolin. Dr. Toolin is the Academic Dean of Online Learning at Holy Apostles College and Seminary. She is also a professor of dogmatic and moral theology. And today I've invited Dr. Toolin on the show to focus in particular on the subject of forgiveness, her own personal story of the journey to forgiveness and its relationship to the sanctity of human life. So welcome, Dr. Toolin. I'm delighted that you were able to accept my invitation to be a guest on this show. Could you share with our audience a bit about yourself?
Sure. My name is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson, and I have been employed at Holy Apostles College and Seminary since 1997. I came into the Roman Catholic Church in February of 1988, and I came because of a dramatic religious experience in Rome. I had gone there with my now deceased husband, Jimmy Toolin, and his mother for her 75th birthday, and the rest of the family. I was not practicing a religion at that time, and we went our divergent ways during the day. And one day he asked me to go on a tour with him and the family, and I said that I would go as long as there was nothing religious on it. And it wasn't because I was anti-Catholic, it was just that it wasn't an interest of mine.
Okay.
So we ended up on a tour outside of the walls of Rome, which included the catacombs, and I always like to say that God has a great sense of humor, because it was a bus in the middle of August in Italy with no air conditioning or bathroom.
I've been there.
Yes. So I went into the catacombs, and once in there I realized it was cooler, and I decided to join the tour, not expecting what would happen. So our tour guide was a Roman Catholic priest in a cassock, Asian, and very petite man.
I've been on that tour twice. I know exactly where you're at.
Okay. So he was telling me, not just me, he was telling all of us about the catacombs and what had occurred. And as if ticker tape had gone through my head, I saw the words, the truth is in the Catholic Church. And it was capital T, which meant nothing to me at that point. I didn't know that Jesus had the name truth. And so I've had students ask me how long it took me to decide to convert. I had normally said 5 seconds, but when I really think about it, I think it was the time between heartbeats. And so my life drastically changed at that time. And I came back to the United States and asked my husband to call his priest because I wanted to take lessons to convert to Catholicism. And he thought it was hysterical because he thought I was kidding. And so I studied with Father Stanley Smolensky in Enfield, Connecticut for 11 months, and I was accepted into the church in February 22nd, 1988. And that changed the journey of my life because I am an abortion survivor, and through the Catholic Church I learned forgiveness. So that's a little bit about me.
Wow, I am very eager to hear your story. Fantastic. I was just there in Rome, in those catacombs, in September of this year, and had been there 2 years before when my daughters and I were invited to sing for the Holy Father for the closing Mass of Mercy, along with the Milwaukee Mercy Choir. And we were there in September. My son was about to begin his postulancy, and it was our last chance to have a group of the family to travel together and visit some of these beautiful sacred sites. And the catacombs each time were profoundly shaking. They really were. Everyone in our group, my daughters, we want to go back. We want to go back as soon as we can. Once you are down there and you see, there is the veil between the communion of saints becomes very thin in that place.
Yeah, it's the blood of the martyrs. It's the blood of the martyrs that I think we feel.
It is. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It is, and they are praying for us, and you feel that while you are there.
Yes, I agree.
It is a remarkable experience. So you come back, you tell your husband, and I bet you could have knocked him off his chair with your...
Oh, yeah, he really thought I was joking with him. And, so it was fun, but once I actually finished the conversion process, I came to Holy Apostles to study for another MA. I was already a PhD. And then when I got through with that, I said, Jimmy, I'd like to go to Washington and study for a licentiate. So he not only got his wife to be Catholic, he got a Catholic theologian who teaches at one of the most orthodox seminaries in the world.
Right.
So, so it was really something.
On that journey, as you are in the middle of the RCIA classes and you're beginning the process, can you describe how you felt? Was it like a doorway opening up? What did you feel? I don't want to put words in your mouth. What did you feel?
I think the word that would come to me the most would be awe, because one of the things about Catholicism is that there's a tremendous amount of information available. Now, obviously, you don't have to learn all of it. Obviously, you learn the catechism, you learn that information, how to participate in Mass, all of those things. But once you go beyond that, there's so much more that you can learn. And no matter what lesson Father Stanley was talking about, I always knew that there was a lot more behind it. And so more than you could learn in 10 lifetimes or 20 lifetimes if you were to study every area of theology. There's no way that you could ever get through and master all of that material. So I was in awe that I had managed to live, at that point, 37 years, without ever coming across anything like this. Now, one of the reasons I say that, I'm very involved in Catholic social teaching, and of course, part of that is the ethical issues around life. And I taught. I was actually a sociologist. and as part of our training, earning a PhD at University of Massachusetts in Amherst, you would be involved in teaching. So I loved sociology. I loved finding out, what made people tick and how we acted in groups. In all that time that I was at UMass, I never once heard the words Catholic social teaching.
Sure.
So I had no idea such a thing even existed. So that's just one example, because obviously, dogma, moral, all of these different concentrations that you can go into. But when I learned about Catholic social teaching, I started to understand sociology in a whole new way. And I think it would be that way in anything that you'd study, whether it was bioethics like you. Bioethics in a secular institution and bioethics as taught by the church is entirely different. So just
different, exactly. And I've had the same experience with sociology. I have multiple certificates in addition to the graduate degrees, and one of them is through the Catholic University of America and the Pro Pontificate Santissimos Annou Foundation. And when I did that program several years ago, I thought I knew Catholic social teaching. It knocked my socks off, and I wanted to just learn more. And as you say, in terms of bioethics, there is an enormous difference between secular bioethics and Catholic bioethics. Our anthropology is so very different. When we look at the human person and the Imago Dei, made in the image and likeness of God, that changes everything.
Yes, it does.
And let's take that full circle. As you're in the middle of your journey, this is both a professional journey, clearly, a very personal journey, a spiritual journey, and you mentioned being an abortion survivor and forgiveness.
Yes.
So this is a very personal, familial journey as well.
Yes, it is.
Can you tell me a bit about that journey?
Yes, well, my mother tried to chemically abort me in 1949, self-abort me. And when I was 11 years old, she told me this. She had used a chemical that her father, my grandfather, had gotten at the drugstore, and he was friends with the pharmacist. And so she said that when she started to bleed, she stopped taking the drug because she was afraid she might die.
Okay.
Obviously, the hope was that I would. But it was when I was 11, she told me this. And, I can remember it like it was yesterday. I remember the kitchen chair I was sitting in, everything. I remember everything about the conversation. So initially, the only way I could describe it is my love for her and for my family, my ancestral family, ended with that conversation as if someone had turned off a light switch. And there was, not that I hated them, I just didn't care about them. And that feeling from age 11 until at least age 38 was solid. Or lack of feeling. So I took care of my mother and father when they were older. They lived in our house, Jimmy and my house, and I took care of them as much as I could. They were both in very bad shape, and then I actually converted after they died. They died when I was 35, and I didn't think anything of them after they died. And then when I converted, I realized that the power of forgiveness is that it frees you. It not only frees you of your sin, but it frees you of all that burden. So it took a while. I can't say that this was something instant, but I also feel that when you convert, when you convert and you walk through the door, that's one thing, but it takes time to grow in the faith. And so as time went on, I realized that the only way that I could ever repair, in as much as is possible, the damage to myself, to my deceased husband, to my parents, to everyone in the family, was to start forgiving. part of forgiving, I think, to me, is trying to understand. And to understand what made my mother make that choice. And whether, initially I didn't think my father knew. I eventually found out that, in fact, it was a family decision of both sides of the family. But I think that...
Do you have a sense of why she began to tell you that at 11? Why did she sit you down and tell you that at 11?
Well, I remarried after my first husband died. The four of us, my husband, myself, and Bertha, my husband's first wife, and Bill, we were all friends. And Bill, that I married after my first husband died, he said that he thinks it's because she couldn't hold it in anymore.
So it was an alleviation of her guilty conscience.
I think that's what he thinks, but I don't know. I always thought because she was alone so much that she wanted a confidant. And I think she thought that by telling me this, she would be able to communicate with me at a different level. Instead, what happened is it shut off essentially all communication.
Sure.
Yeah. But anyway, so with forgiveness, I think you need understanding. And so it took me a while, but I had known my father was a serial adulterer. I suspect he probably had around 200 girlfriends during the time they were married. I'm not exaggerating. I could be underestimating, actually. And so I think that pretty much destroyed her. So my mother had been like the princess in her parents' home. And I think when she left that home, she expected to be treated, as we all expect to be treated, well by our husbands. And instead, he cheated on her within a year of them being together, and she had found that out. So I think that pretty much destroyed her, and she just could not conceive in 1949 having a baby by this man, and at the same time, would he support her and take care of her and take care of a child. And so I think that was what was behind it. And I don't know that, but I think that was what was behind it. So that enabled me to understand her better and empathize and try to forgive.
Sure.
My father, I don't know. Clearly I've forgiven him, but I just don't think he was ever, even though it was his family and he supported it most of the time, I don't think he had the emotional connection. And so without that emotional connection, I think that was why he would have agreed to the abortion.
A bit of a narcissist, perhaps?
It could be. It could be very easily. So I did, this is part of what's great about being Catholic. So I have to forgive myself for what I did. I forgive them for what they did. And now, I can pray for them and love them in the sense of wishing the good for them, wishing that they, wanting the good for them is that they attain the beatific vision. And so I do pray that for them and for my grandfather who, is the one who went and got the medicine. So that's, yeah.
It's beautiful that this journey to forgiveness started in the catacombs among the blood of the martyrs who forgave their murderers. And, how that transcends space and time.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking
does. Yeah.
A martyrdom and the blood of the martyrs centuries before, and yet that sacrifice can heal even today.
Mm-hmm.
Reaches
absolutely.
beyond the veil of space and time, completely transcends it by the power of God. And as you mentioned, the empathy and understanding with your mom, I've got like 3 different things running through my head. First of all, when you talked about truth and being in the catacombs and seeing, that word truth with capital T, and later coming to understand that truth was the name for Christ, the incarnate Word. It is very much the same experience. I'm a secular Carmelite, that both St. Teresa of Avila and St. Teresa Benedicta of the Cross had. St. Teresa of Avila understanding God in terms of truth, and Teresa Benedict of the Cross picking up a biography, the autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila at a friend's house. That friend had lost her husband, and she had come to try and console them, and she could not understand how this widow could be happy. And she picked up the autobiography of St. Teresa of Avila, read it in a night, put it down, and said, "This is truth." I know that blows my mind too, but in a night, this is truth with a capital T, and converted.
And so, when you're faced with that, one thing that I can say with surety is when you are truly faced with the power of God in your life, and you are not really practicing anything, right? I was secular. And all of a sudden you see something go through your head like a ticker tape, and it's like, okay, this is not my imagination. This is God. And you have a choice that's going to really impact the rest of your life. So I don't know. I know people can say no, but I don't know how they say no in that kind of circumstance. When you are confronted with the truth in such a powerful way, how do you say no? So
it is clear in those moments that there is an invitation, and there is the freedom of to make an act of the will and to accept that invitation. It is very beautiful to see that. So on this program, we talk an awful lot about discernment, about discerning the will of God, and about being open to that. And the fact that you, in a secular state, were completely open to that invitation. I also think it is beautiful, after having been in Rome in September in 90 degrees, walking 9 miles a day recently. It never ceases to amaze me how God allows these ordinary events of our life, the hot Roman summer, and He tweaks those moments so that we are put in the right place at the right time to receive the invitation.
And even that priest, Now, here at Holy Apostles, we have a large Vietnamese student body, among others, but we have a large Vietnamese student body because we serve the oppressed church. And I see these men walking around on campus with these cassocks on or with their habits on, and it's like, I don't know what that man said. I really don't. It was well over, many, many years ago, 1988. It was over 30 years ago. But I know whatever he said was the right thing for me. It's like God must have put those words in his mouth that I would be that open. And that's always impressed me because, for me I was working in the insurance industry at the time, and to convert, to leave my job, to go study, and then to come here. In the last 21 years that I've worked here as a professor, I've trained well over 200 priests, academically trained over 200 priests. I don't even know how many sisters, brothers, lay people, and now through the online program, I've helped in the academic formation of many, many priests and sisters who are cloistered. And it's like all because this man in the catacombs, who never knew the impact he had, said the right words, and God used his words and intervened in my life. It is like there was a before and there was a before and an after for me.
That's a beautiful image. There's so much there that is a richly beautiful image. You have the individual who is an alter Christi. They're in the depths of the earth, and assuredly praying for all of you as he's walking those steps with you. And that silent prayer of that faithful priest and the words that he said, and you have been able to give back 100-fold by training more priests, more sisters, giving to the church more faithful men who will in turn be able to continue to perpetuate that blessing. And I love the image of you being in the belly of the earth, in that cemetery, in that place of death, with a priest, and then I remember walking up that stairwell when you see the sun shining in that open doorway as you're coming out of the catacombs. And there is, that feeling of the bodies of these martyrs who have been taken down there and buried, and knowing that they have risen gloriously. And there you are in that catacomb taking a look at that doorway because of that priest and coming through a totally different person than when you went down there.
Yes, definitely.
What a beautiful image. Incidentally, I have 2, soon-to-be 3 daughters who are Holy Apostle students as well. I have a junior who is a theology and humanities major. I have another who is a sacred arts and theology major, and daughter number 3 is about to be a history and sacred arts major. So you've got 3 of mine over there right now.
Okay.
It's a phenomenal program, Magisterium Faithful program, and we are delighted to be a part of it. So you are on this personal journey of forgiveness, which is it is so beautiful to see how God has woven all the aspects of your life together. You have the professional self who is giving back 100-fold. You have the personal self. You have your spiritual self that continues to grow, and is, as you articulated so beautifully earlier, that those of us in academia have this hunger for knowledge, this hunger for the authentic truth. And if we could study for 1,000 years, we would never exhaust the riches of the faith and what's out there. And now you are writing a memoir to be able to pass this on as a way of helping others to also come to forgiveness and truth.
Yes.
Can you tell me about that process? What prompted you to begin to write, and what prompted you to have the desire to share that writing with others?
Well, I had always been interested in writing, and so I was at I'm trying to think of what it was. It was one of the accrediting bodies. I was at a conference for one of the accrediting bodies, and I was sitting next to a woman from Albertus, and Albertus Magnus, which is a Catholic college in New Haven in Connecticut. And we were talking, and she said, we just opened this program that's non-resident, but you can, you do a lot of the work online, and you go 1 week every month in creative writing. And I said, creative writing. I said, well, what else, what does that mean? And she said, creative nonfiction, creative, fiction, children's, and, books for children. So I thought creative nonfiction. And so I was toying with it for a while because I just didn't have enough degrees at that point.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, right. So anyway, I was toying with it, and I thought, maybe I could write pro-life fiction. So, I left the woman, and I remembered the place, Albertus, but I didn't think about it too much. And then finally I said, well, I'm going to apply. And I did, and one of the women that works here with me, another professor, she wrote a recommendation, and I was in. And they said, well, what are you going to write, fiction or nonfiction? I'm thinking to myself, pro-life fiction. I was driving down here one day, and, okay, so it's another ticker tape story, I'm sorry, but I was driving down here one day, and I was saying, should I write fiction or nonfiction, fiction or nonfiction? And it was like I just had this flash go through my mind, write nonfiction. It's like, oh boy, here we go again. So
that's awfully personal at that point when God is telling you, when you're open to that will and you're hearing write nonfiction, you know what you're being asked to do.
Yes. So I said, okay. So I actually said, okay. I have to admit I was kind of looking forward to writing fiction, but I said, okay. So I enrolled in the creative nonfiction program, and that, of course, can entail any number of nonfiction pieces, but I decided on memoir. And I started working on this piece, and it was rather painful. I sat down one day, and I had, 5 or 6 pieces of paper, and I just wrote down like a word on every line or a phrase on every line of incidents that I remembered that had occurred between usually my mother and I, sometimes my father and I, over my life prior to their death when I was 35. I ended up with 5 or 6 pages that every phrase, word on those pages, single-spaced, I knew what it meant. And so I thought about that for a while, and I started to organize it into sections, and I ended up writing it in sections according to where I was living. And so I wrote in Providence, Rhode Island. I lived on Burnett Street, and I talked about the house, and I talked about, that was when I found out, that was where I was when I found out I had been a survivor. And then eventually my father left us, and that's another chapter, and so on until finally I moved with my husband, Jimmy, to Till Street in Enfield, Connecticut. My mother, I don't want to say that she actually abused me. She neglected me. So, like it's kind of embarrassing. I would wash my hair maybe once every 6 months. My teeth had turned black from stains because I didn't brush my teeth. I saw a picture of myself when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and when I looked at the picture, I thought, why didn't anyone ever call the police or social services or something? There must have been something at that time, because I was clearly not in a good way.
Sure.
And, of course, no one ever did.
Your voice is waving in and out a little bit there.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay.
Shall I redo that piece?
I think we're okay, but I just, however the mic is by you, I just want to make sure that our listeners are able to catch everything there.
Okay.
So what you're telling me there is that about the age of 7, you see a picture of yourself, and it's shocking to look back and realize that you've met, as a sociologist, you clearly understand that you've met the state criteria now for abused and neglected. Why didn't anyone call Child Social Services or whatever agency or talk to a relative and try and get you help?
So I would call it neglect more than abuse. There was only there were arguments. It wasn't so much an argument as much as my mother screaming at me. And there were tough times like that, but it's not like she beat me or didn't feed me. But she did have quite a temper, and she was not happy with her own life and certainly not happy with my father. And a lot of times I think that came out against me. So I write about that in the memoir. I eventually also wrote about something that I don't know the answer to, and that was whether my father had other children. Certainly prior to the advent of artificial means of birth control, like the birth control pill or the IUD, pregnancy was pretty common. That was not, people didn't want to be pregnant, but were pregnant. And so I've tried to search to see if I had any half-brothers or half-sisters, anyone else that would have been related to me. I've never found anybody, but I did look. So it's the memoir itself involves both the events that occurred to me that I selected, that certainly said the most about what was going on in my life without it being an autobiography. In other words, with memoir, you look back and say, okay, what path was I on, and what occurred that really symbolizes that. And then there's a lot about me thinking about trying to understand what went on, and did I have any half-brothers or half-sisters. My director at Albertus Magnus actually said that when I talk about possibly having half brothers or half sisters, it's the most animated I get. I'm a pretty serious person, and I write very factually. And he said that when I got to the part about having potential brothers and sisters, I was, he said it was just very emotional even for him. And that is where, I'm talking about, I can imagine that someday someone's going to knock on the door and I'll think it's just a delivery, and I'll open the door or I'll answer the phone. It'll be somebody saying, I hope you don't think I'm crazy, but I think I may be your relative. I think your father was my grandfather or something, Of course, that never happened. But I think it says something about that desire to know that's still with me.
I think that is a very deep-seated and profound desire. You see the value of human life, and you see the experience that you've gone through that is heart-wrenching. And there is that desire to reach out and try and make sense of it all, for one, but also to connect with others. My own father found out that we've got multiple layers of adoption in my family. My father found out when he was 70 that he was adopted, and his father was adopted, and my listeners know that of my 8 children, 3 of them are adopted. So adoption is kind of a family tradition here. And I do look at my adopted children and understand, or try to understand, that there is a mourning, that there is at some point a desire to see, is there anybody else out there? And I think that will grow as they grow, and I'll have to try and help them face that with faith as best we can. When my dad found out that he was adopted, we have a relative that had come to visit just before I was married, and she was the only living relative that my dad knew he had. She came from another country, and my mom had Alzheimer's. And my aunt and my mother were in the kitchen, and my aunt said to my mom, "George knows he's adopted, doesn't he?" And my mom gave her a blank look, and she said, "Well, for goodness sake, if he doesn't know, don't tell him." Well, at that moment, my mom's whole world was disappearing. She didn't know necessarily that the woman in the mirror was really her. So first thing she did was go to my dad and say, "George, Aunt so-and-so questions whether you're adopted." My dad went to my aunt, and she suddenly said, "My English isn't so good, I'm not so sure," and suddenly backed off on the story. But it was clear, and I contacted her privately, and she said, yes, he was adopted from an orphanage when he was 9 months old. So later I asked him as he was dying in our home, "Dad, is there you want me to look? Is there anybody out there? What if you have other siblings? What if you have, what do you want me to do?" And he said, on the other side, we'll figure it all out, basically. It's okay.
That's true. That's true.
But I struggle with those thoughts, too, wondering, is there going to be someone who knocks and says, "By the way, we're related to your dad in a different way"?
Yes.
So I can see where that would be a very passionate part of who you are and how you write. And a meaningful part of the story that you have to tell there via your memoir.
Of course, today with Ancestry.com and 23andMe, you do have a better shot at finding genetic relatives, and certainly that's something that I've tried. At this point, I haven't found anybody, but the thing is that it is something that's available for most people.
It is. So. As a bioethicist, there are cautions that come with that, too.
Really?
Yeah, we can talk privately, but there are some things that I would be cautious about. We've done the Ancestry.com as well, and I think that's a great way of looking for one's genealogy and one's history. In terms of the various genetic tests that one can do, I'm always skeptical about having genetic information out there and not knowing how it may be used later on.
Good point.
When we look at history and how people can be persecuted for their genetics, the thought of having genetic information out there and not knowing how it could be used for myself, my children, or anybody else later on, I have a caution with that.
Sure. That makes sense.
So here you are working on this memoir. How far in this project are you at this moment?
Well, I have more or less completed the memoir, and I'm in the process of now looking for an agent, looking for people who would read it and, comment, and then also for an agent. So my goal, obviously, is to publish it because I think that it's important that people learn that message. One of the things that I do in the memoir, I think that I have to be 100% frank, memoir always involves truth. The problem, of course, with truth is that when you're looking at what happened, in my case, 40, 50 years ago, you are going by memory, and you do the very best you can to be accurate. That's just a requirement of memoir writing, and so I have done that. And I've spoken, what I do, though, is I change everybody's name. So, every relative that's in there has a name that wasn't theirs. And I did that on purpose to preserve their privacy, especially my parents. So I never refer to them as anything except Ma and Pa because, I don't want them to roll over in their graves at what I've done here. But anyway, so I do call them Ma and Pa. But another important thing is that when you go through memoir and you're talking about other people and how they impacted you, I think at some point, and I do that at the very end of the memoir, I have to be honest. I made a lot of mistakes in my life. And certainly those mistakes were partially because of how I was raised. So I'm very honest about that also, because I don't want people saying, well, all of a sudden you've become a goody two-shoes now that you've got religion. It's like, no, I did bad things, and I own up to that. I don't go into great detail, but I just mentioned I did bad things, and I regret them and have asked forgiveness for them and think in my own way of trying to forgive myself. One of the worst things I did, and I'm very honest about this because I think it's something people need to think about, and that is I used artificial means of birth control when I was first married. And my husband, who is a devout Catholic, did not know. And at the time, I was a militant feminist, and in that militant feminist world, there was nothing wrong with doing that. I converted, obviously. I had children. I converted. And I was in a bioethics class, of all things, here at Holy Apostles with Monsignor David Liptak. I don't know if you know of him, but he's written been involved in some writing projects. He's now deceased. And during the lecture, he said, birth control, artificial means of birth control, the birth control pill and the IUD, both of which I had used, can cause abortion. And I went up to him after class and I said, what are you talking about? I said, these prevent getting pregnant. And he said, no, they prevent, I believe it's implantation. I could be wrong on that. But whatever it is, they do cause spontaneous abortion. So I'm very honest that this was not my intention. Right. But when I look, here is my mother who tried to abort me. I don't know if there were other children that she tried to abort. She never said. She told me she'd only been pregnant once.
Okay.
But here I am, and I was young and fertile. For all I know, I could have been getting pregnant every month and aborting every month. Not on purpose, obviously. And that's something that I think has, it's like the sin of, we talk about the sin of the father going through generations, but it's also the sin of the mother.
Very good point.
I mean, this bothers me because I think to myself, if I'm actually lucky enough to attain heaven, I mean, I don't know how many children will be there to meet me that I didn't know I had. That's a sobering thought.
It is a sobering thought. I've had Vicki Thorne on this program before, and I will be having her again. She's wonderful. I have to put you in touch with her.
Okay.
She is the person who was the founder and president of Project Rachel, the largest, most successful post-abortion ministry in the world.
Yes.
She is in 28 countries, 150 dioceses.
Wow.
And she has talked about this. And she and I have presented together at a Humane Vitae conference in October for bishops here in Milwaukee. She is phenomenal. I've got to give you her information. But this is an issue that she has talked about as she goes country to country. We were talking not too long ago about the women in the Eastern Bloc, how many of them have had 9 abortions and have been contracepting and have not known that this is an abortifactant. And it shatters them when they realize later on as their children are having children. And there is the need to give that to God. It's so much easier to forgive other people than to forgive ourselves. We're the hardest to forgive. And yet that's what God's asking us to do, to rely on that divine mercy of His. But it is so hard. And I do understand where you're coming from. And it is courageous to write about it, to speak about it, and to try and help others, one who are struggling with the same thing, but others who may not know this. And to keep
I absolutely did not know it. I know I did not know it. And I was stunned when he said that, and I even went up, and it's like, what are you talking about? That's not true. It's like, surprise.
Vicki has talked about giving talks worldwide, and that being one of the questions that people invariably come up to her with, panicked, and no, you must be wrong. You must have your facts wrong. No, I can show you the data. This is it. And just how hard that is. And that's one of those lies. I've often said that Satan has a very limited toolbox. And in that toolbox, you have fear and lying. Those are the 2 biggest hammers that he has. When we look at your mom's story, just the fear there. And no matter how, there has got to be compassion for that fear that she had, incapacitating fear. And as we look at what you've struggled with, when you look back at family history, the memoir, and everything, you see the evil monster and his ability to try and manipulate people with lies and just the damage it does.
He is the father of lies.
To speak that truth, and it is so beautiful that in the catacombs, the San Callistics catacombs, that where how many popes are buried in that one room alone, that you saw the word truth with a capital T. And here you are putting that truth in the written word and getting that word out there and sharing it with others. That is so beautiful to see that faithfulness and the abundance of His love being transmitted through you.
Thank you.
How has the process of writing the memoir changed you?
Well, certainly it has made me organize my thoughts in such a way that I see the path clearer than I ever did. I mean, we all talk about, well, we're on a path to something, but when you're towards the end of it, I'm 69 now, when you're towards the end of it and you turn and you look back, it's like when I look at this book, I can see where I ended up and where I started and all the twists and turns. But all of those twists and turns, I think in some way God has used. So that's, I think, how I would say it's changed me. It's made me more aware of God's presence in my life, even when I didn't know it. I mean, talk about weird, it's like my initial master's degree in sociology was in the sociology of religion. Now, mind you, I was not religious. Right. So all the way back there when I was just young, I said, gee, that sounds pretty interesting. And I studied with two of the top sociologists of religion at that time at UMass, Wade Clark Roof and Jay Demarest. And, then eventually I moved into studying criminology, and that was basically a statistics. And now I'm the institutional statistician here as well as performing other roles. But so it's like I see how God just kind of throughout, has been directing me without me being aware of it. And when I look back at this book, and it's like if I start at the back and go towards the front, it's like, yeah, that happened, but it meant nothing at the time. I mean, right. when my mother-in-law wanted to go to Rome for her 75th birthday, it was like, okay, if you want to. And that is the single most important trip, but the most important moment was during that trip that changed my life in a way that it was supposed to be changed, but I never saw coming. So
it's hard to imagine that connecting the dots would reveal the tapestry, and it does.
Yeah. Yes.
You see the dots, but you don't, when you stand back and you begin connecting the dots, it's not just a static picture. It is truly a tapestry, and it is a wonder to behold. I've often said that in my own life, God has had more twists and turns than a corkscrew in my life, and it's like, hang on and see where He's taking me. When you were 20 years old, if someone would have told you that at 35, you would be standing in a catacomb in Rome, and then later on where you'd be, you would have told them they were crazy.
Yes, exactly. And, I was a young professional. I was a militant feminist. I was out to make money and have a good life for myself and my family, of course. But when I look at it now, it was like, gee, there was, even though those were my intentions, they were certainly not God's, and yet He used them.
And really, when you had a plan, that there was a roadmap, even though you didn't see the roadmap, there was a plan.
No. And, just the statistics. I do all the statistics here at Holy Apostles. It's, it's cyclical. It's not like I do it all the time. But it's like the only reason I know how to do them is because I studied criminology at UMass as a sociologist.
Sure.
How weird is that? It's like, well, you can learn those for criminology, honey, but you're going to be using them for the accrediting bodies at Holy Apostles. It's a riot.
When you look at where you've been in this journey, and you've talked about the formation of over 200 seminarians, the religious, the lay leaders. When you look at that picture, what single piece of advice would you have for men in formation right now and for their formators?
I think the most important thing is to be open to what God wants you to do, to almost look for it in places you wouldn't expect. So, I mean, obviously there's the sacraments and the prayers and holy hours, but God can use things like hot temperature in Rome and a bus that doesn't have a bathroom or air conditioning and change your life. So don't only, obviously he communicates through those things, of course, but he also communicates through patterns, and I think it's just important for people to be aware of anything, how he tells us, that we may not see it at first,
Right.
Be open to his word, and when you know his word, in my case, there was no way I couldn't have known, but when you know his word, follow it. Just follow it, no matter what. So that is something I think that is very important, because we live in a country, in the United States, we live in a country where we're very rational, We have to figure everything out. We have to think about it. Sometimes there's no time to think, and that's what happened to me in the catacombs. It was the difference between one heartbeat and another that changed my life.
That's beautiful. When you think of the sacred and merciful heart of Christ, and the Immaculate Heart of Mary, and your heartbeat being between theirs, that is truly beautiful. And for that priest, and talking about for men in formation who don't always see what's happening and why it's happening, for that priest who is in a cassock down there in the catacombs doing what he does each and every day, multiple times a day. It was his ordinary, faithful work. It wasn't writing great dissertations at that moment, giving conferences. It was in the ordinary of taking a tour group through that he was the instrument of God that wrought tremendous change and forgiveness and healing for family and a generation and others. His simple act is huge. Well, Dr. Toolin, go on.
I've always wished that I could have known what his name was so that he could have known the impact he had, but I never found it out. But hopefully I will meet him after we're both dead.
Have you gone back to Rome since then?
I've been back one time, yes, and it's very different going through Rome as a tourist and going through Rome as a Catholic. And that to me would be, it's almost like you can't explain it, because you're walking, that these great men were there, Peter and, Paul, and, about the catacombs and about the, really the trials that so many saints went through, so many martyrs. It's very different when you're standing there looking to see what you can buy. Like, I like red pocketbooks. That was my goal the first time, find a red leather pocketbook. And knowing that doesn't matter at all. What matters is what happened there and what can continue to happen there. So it's a very different experience.
Site, it is incredible. It really is. Having been there twice in the past, 3 years, 4 years, and seriously hoping to go back as soon as possible with my children again. As a pilgrimage site, it is phenomenal. Going from church to church, seeing incorrupt saints there, venerating relics, praying at the burial site of Saint Monica, for instance. It is and Assisi. Equally, the peace there is just incredible. Well, Dr. Toolin, it has been a joy to have the opportunity to interview you on this WCAT program, Inter Vitam et Mortem, Between Life and Death, interviews and discussion with a Catholic bioethicist. And we are really at the end of our hour here. I just wanted to thank you so much for sharing your story, being so generous with your time, and
you're welcome.
It has been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yes, and thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
God bless you.
You too.
We hope you enjoyed the program and will join us back for another show on WCAT Radio. This is Sebastian Mahfood. Good day.